The Buzz with Jess Lujan.
We're back with my in-studio guest, Cruz, who's currently the Chief of Staff for Senator Will Castro and also former Chief of Staff for the late Angel Guerrero Santos. So again, thank you again for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with me this evening. We're talking about, of course, protesting, peaceful protests, and again, prior to when the break, you had answered that the movement, at least the movement that you're involved with, again, there's other groups out there.
Of course, yes, there are multiple organizations out there.
The movement that you belong to, and I think maybe as well as other movements as well, that it's not necessarily our way or the highway, Yankee go home. It's like include us in this negotiation table, make room for us so we can. I guess it's kind of like the clause that the federal government didn't grant us in the Commonwealth, is the mutual consent clause, right?
Exactly, and if I can just backtrack a little, Jess, I spoke earlier about joining the late Senator Angel Santos in protesting. We found out that it's time that we get into the system. We become part of government, which is why the late Senator Angel Santos decided to run for office. And if you remember back then, there was a special election that was held due to the untimely death of one of the senators. And so we ran. We put Angel Santos on the ticket, and we lost by 199 votes in the special election to Senator Francis Santos. The following election, he got elected into office.
In the general election, right?
And he was a top 6 or top 7 vote getter. So the people spoke that despite him being labeled as he was even labeled as a racist, a radical racist, right? But in fact, he was a true nationalist. So we ran for senator, and we were able to get our foot in the door and try to work things out diplomatically with the military. We had we accomplished a lot.
And I remember back then, because at that time, it was, I guess, the height, the peak of you guys protesting and standing out there, and people are knowing you. You guys are even camped out at Adelup.
We camped out, yes.
So I remember that because of that, made a lot of people uncomfortable. Okay, a lot of people uncomfortable, but also again, when you go back into the election, he got elected. Not by the minority, but by the majority of people, but would never admit it. But would never admit the support. He spoke my conscience.
Yes, and if it weren't for him and the rest of his colleagues in the 23rd Guam legislature, the Chamorro Land Trust today, although it's under judicial review, would have never came to realization. There are thousands of families who are now on Chamorro Land Trust land.
And still 1,000 await.
And still 1,000 await. But because of him and the great Chamorro Nation, that law has came to fruition, and we hope that in the coming future that those lands will be continued to go to our native inhabitants of our island.
But let me ask you this, because of course I mean the untimely death of Angel, still we don't know the cause of that death. There are suspicions, but anyway. That being said, when Angel Santos died, it seemed like the Chamorro Nation was left again without leadership. Okay, without leadership and direction, and it didn't quite have that oomph, that it had. As a matter of fact, it caused splinter groups at this point, and then I mean I know I'm in talk radio, and so the folks now it's kind of like we have a bigger problem out there, but it seemed like the splinter groups are amongst themselves not quite cohesive for the bigger picture.
You're absolutely correct. But I see in the near future that these different organizations coming together
again,
and
Well, I know new leadership is coming about.
Yes,
from,
yes, you
from the
hear about
organizations,
Ned Pablo out there, who's very, very active in his voice.
Sure, sure.
With the same cause that the late Senator Angel Santos had, and unfortunately the untimely death of Ed Benventi.
Ed Benventi, yes.
Which you know was one of the big. It really hurt the movement when he passed away. But
the institutional wisdom and knowledge, you know,
right,
but they instilled in people like yourself too.
Well, yes, and then you know what we're seeing a lot more of is the younger generation.
Sure.
That are actually coming out and saying, you know what, we understand. We need to join in this fight. We need to join this fight to preserve our language, preserve our culture. The day of that protest when I got arrested, the group out there were a youth organization that actually came out. That was their organized protest. And when
you're talking about youth, what are you talking? Because some folks were critical of youth. They're saying, well, you know, you again, former law enforcement individual and an adult, you should have known better at this youth. When we're talking about youth, what age group are these youth? Are they youth?
They were high
above?
school.
Okay. So they're not necessarily minors, 12, 13.
No,
or
and if there were kids there, and there were kids there that were maybe 11, 12, 13 years old, but they were there with their parents.
Their parents, okay.
Right?
Okay. So they had a parent or guardian with them.
Yes, but for the most part, they were 16, 17, 18 years old that were still in school, who felt that they were going to lose their heritage by this one single issue of the firing range, the Texan. So they saw that it was a need for them to voice their concern.
So basically, because in years past, in your involvement with Angel Santos and activism and protesting and all that, back then you were the guys calling for the protests, and you know, and people would hear about it. Now this time, you guys weren't calling for the protest. You were invited, you heard something was happening, so you joined the protest.
Exactly. Yeah, these protests are taking place everywhere. And you hit it right on the head.
Nail on the head, yeah.
That it was back in the early 90s and the mid 90s, it was the Great Chamorro Nation that were calling people out, come join us. Come join us. We need your help. We need the numbers. Now you're hearing that there's a protest here, there's a meeting there, and they're inviting us to come.
Sure.
The old timers, right?
Yeah.
You see lately, former Senator Hope Cristobal, who is part of OPIR, who's now coming out very, very vocal. I thank her. And,
I heard her emotional
heart.
testimony. You know, a couple of weeks back, of course, when there was a round table with the military folks.
She gave very passionate testimony of the federal government continuing to treat us as second-class citizens, and I see her pain because she's been doing this since the 70s, you know, since the 70s and 80s with Dr. Robert Underwood and Ron Rivera. And Ron
I remember
that group back then?
I remember back then. Unfortunately, I never served with her in the legislature. She was out of the legislature when I came in, or I think she was one legislature before
Actually, she
me,
served in the 23rd.
With Angel?
With Angel and Senator Mark Charfres.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Mark
and Ben Pangilinan back then.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes.
Those are guys who basically were part of the Shon Chamorro. Yeah.
Yes, they were, and they were all responsible in moving the Chamorro Land Trust forward.
Yeah. You know what? I got to pay some bills again. I don't think we're going to have time to get into this, so that's why we're going to go into an episode. So I'm going to ask you to come back next week. But we're going to take a break, and then we have to